Completing the square, part 1. Now, in a question, they'll either ask you to complete the square, or they may say, write the expression in this format. And we're going to have a look at how to do that. So if we're given x squared plus 14x, the first thing we do is we write down a pair of brackets. Then we put an x inside and a square outside the brackets. We then half the coefficient of the x and put it inside the bracket. So it's a plus 14. When you half it, you get plus 7. Then you put a subtraction sign outside the brackets. Then you square this number. So 7 squared is 49. And you put that outside the bracket and you subtract it. And you've just completed the square for this expression. So let's have a look at another example. So this one is slightly different because we have a 3-term quadratic expression. The last one we just had an x squared and an x term. So I will show you how to do these ones. So you start with the same method. You write your pair of brackets. You then write an x inside the brackets, a square outside, and a subtraction sign outside. Then as before, we half the coefficient of the x, which is 1. And then we square this number and we subtract it. Now we can't just forget about this minus 4. We bring it down. We're going to include it. So first of all, you write our x plus 1 squared. Then we tidy these two terms up. Minus 1 minus 4 is minus 5. And then that is your final answer. When the question asks to leave the expression in this format, sometimes students get confused. They sometimes think that both these have to be positive. Just remember, this p and this q are integers, so that means they can be positive or negative. We had a positive coefficient of x, therefore this made the p positive, and for the q we had a subtraction of 1 and then we had a minus 4 as well, and whenever we added these two together we end up with negative 5. So in this instance this q turns out to be a negative integer. Let's have a look at another one. So I have to complete the square for the following expression. X squared minus 6x plus 12. So as before, write down my brackets, my x inside, my square outside, and my subtraction sign. Then I half my coefficient of x and put it inside the bracket. Then I square the number inside the bracket and I put it outside and I subtract it. And then I bring down my plus 12 at the end. From there I just tidy everything up. So I bring down my x minus 3 squared. Then I add these two terms together to give me plus 3. And there you have the final answer. Now that we know how to complete the square, we're going to look at using completing the square to solve equations. So I'm going to complete the square for x squared minus 2x minus 6 in order to solve the equation. So let's have a look. So let's go ahead and complete the square. So we'll write down our x, our brackets and a square with our negative sign outside. We'll then half the coefficient of the x to get minus 1. Then we'll square this and subtract it. And then we'll bring our minus 6 down. Okay, well that equals 0. And then we'll tidy these two terms up. Right, from this stage, what we're going to do is to solve an equation, we need the x by itself. So we're looking to get this x by itself. Now to do that, I think of unpeeling all the layers. So the first layer we'll take off is the minus 7. So we'll add 7 to both sides. Our next layer is our squared, so we'll square root both sides. Don't forget, at GCSE, when you square root a number, you must write down the positive and negative answer. So it's positive and negative square root of 7. Then the next layer is we need to get rid of the -1, so we add 1 to both sides. Now, although our answer is x is 1 plus or minus square root of 7, they want us to leave the answer to 3 significant figures, so that gives us a clue that we have to actually put our answer into the calculator. And to do that, we'll do 1 plus root 7 and then 1 minus root 7. And the two answers we get are x is 3.65 and x is minus 1.65. And there are two values for x. For this example, when we solve the equation by completing the square, we have to leave the answer in surd form. So the first thing we'll do is we'll complete the square. So we've got plus 3 because we've halved the coefficient of x. We have a 9 because we have squared the number inside the bracket and subtracted it. And then we bring the minus 14 down. Then we tidy that up. And then once we have completed the square, we have to solve it by getting the x by itself. So the first thing we do is we add 23 to both sides to get rid of the minus 23. We then do the square root of both sides. Then the final step is we subtract minus 3 off both sides. So our answers will therefore be x is minus 3 plus root 23 and x is 3 minus root 23. In an exam, if they've left one space for the answer, it's quite acceptable to write it like this. However, if there's 2 spaces, write the answers separately. We're now going to look at completing the square when the coefficient of the x squared term is not 1. So here's our first example. So we have to complete the square for an expression, and you can see that the coefficient of the x squared term is minus 1, not 1. And in order to complete the square, we must have a 1 in front of the x squared. So what we can do is we can simply divide through by minus 1. For the first stage of completing the square, we're looking at these two terms. So I'm actually just going to divide these two terms by minus 1. So taking out minus 1. Now don't forget, you don't need to write minus 1 there, you can just write minus. And then you'll bring down your plus 2, so it's still part of the expression. So we'll complete the square for x squared minus 6x, which gives us half of minus 6 is minus 3. Square that, you get 9, so you're subtracting 9. Then bring down your plus 2. So now you've done your completing the square, we can now multiply this minus 1 by the 2 terms inside the bracket. So this is one term and this is the other term. So that will give us minus x squared minus 3 squared, and minus times the minus 9 will give us a plus 9. And then we will bring down our plus 2. And when we tidy that up, we add our 9 and our 2 together, we get plus 11. And that is our final answer. Here we have another one. This time the coefficient of the x squared term is 2. So the first thing we'll do is we'll divide these terms by 2. That will give us 2 outside and x squared plus 4x inside the bracket. Then we will complete the square for these 2 terms, which will get x plus 2 all squared minus 4. So after we complete the square, we will then multiply the 2 terms inside the bracket by the 2. So this term and this term. And then the final thing we do is we tidy up the numbers. So our final answer is 2 brackets x plus 2 all squared minus 3. Here we have another example. In this example, not only do we have a coefficient of the x squared term which is not 1, we also have to solve it as well. So the first thing I'll do is I will divide these two terms by 3. I will then complete the square for x squared minus 8 over 3x. So I will half the coefficient of the x, which gives me 8 over 6, because I'm halving a third, so I get 6. Now at this stage I'm going to actually simplify this fraction to make it easier, so it's actually 4 over 3. I'm then going to square the 4 over 3 and subtract it. Then I will bring down my plus 4. So once I've completed the square, inside this square bracket I will now times the 3 by these two terms, which gives me the following. Then I bring down my plus 4. What I will do next is I will tidy up the two numbers. Now in order to add these two numbers, it's better to write 4 as a fraction. So 4 is the same as 12 thirds. And then by adding minus 16 thirds plus 12 thirds, I will get minus 4 thirds. Okay, now I'm going to try and get x by itself. So I will add 4 thirds to both sides to get rid of the minus 4 thirds. Then the next step is I will divide both sides by 3. At this stage it might have been quite easy to make a mistake, and sometimes people, instead of dividing by the 3 first on both sides, they will do the square root. Now when you're solving an equation to get x by itself, you reverse the BODMAS rules. So with BODMAS you would square, then you would times, so when you undo it, you divide by the 3 and then you do square root. So now we divided by 3, we can then take the square root of both sides. So that will leave us with plus or minus square root of 4 over 9. And you can actually simplify this because you know the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. And then from that stage, you add 4 thirds to both sides. Then we have x is 4 thirds plus 2 over 3. 4 thirds minus 2 over 3, so that gives us our answers of 2 and 2 thirds. When you have to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square, when the coefficient in front of the x squared is not 1, there's a quicker way of doing these. You can see here, I have divided these two terms by 3, then once I've completed the square, I times the two terms inside the bracket by 3 again. Instead of doing those few steps, what I can do at the very beginning, I can simply divide all these terms by 3. So divide the 3x squared by 3, the minus 8x by 3, the 4 by 3, and the 0 by 3. And you can only do this when it's an equation. So it would look like this. So you can see at the very beginning, I've divided all the way through by 3, and then it looks much easier to solve. Here are a couple of questions for you to try yourself. Pause the video and then have a go. Here are the solutions. Have a look through and check your answers. As I've just mentioned, when you have a quadratic equation which you have to solve by completing the square and the coefficient in front of the x squared is not 1 but something else, there's an easier and quicker way of solving these. So to recap, instead of dividing these two terms by 2, then completing the square and then timesing the 2 by the two terms inside the brackets, you can do the following. So you can simply divide all these terms by 2 at the very beginning, and then it makes it much easier to solve. So here are a few more questions for you to try yourself. Pause the video and then have a go. How'd you get on? Here are the answers. If you answered anything incorrectly, have a look back through the video and then have another go.